Today we are talking about what I'm going to call autogynophiles getting sexually aroused by pretending to nurse babies. And I'm finding this really disturbing that anybody's accepting this as acceptable. It's really quite discouraging, disgusting, and damaging, I think, to these infants. So in the Daily Mail, we have a headline that says, "We aren't skilled in helping men to breastfeed. Whistleblower says counselors are being forced to support transgender and LGBTQI families in chest feeding journey, despite not being trained to do it." Well, they're not trained to do it because men don't lactate.
Right. I find this horrific, and I can't believe anybody is okay with subjecting a baby to this. Breastfeeding is for feeding a hungry baby. And this picture that I saw disgusted me. And I will say it, sir, you are disgusting for doing this to a baby. Hungry baby, and they latch it onto a man's nipple. There's nothing there. There's no milk. There's no hope of milk coming in. He did this for his own gratification. So now we are providing men sexual gratification at the expense of a hungry baby.
An infant. I mean, it's horrifying to me that this is being accepted. I mean, in any other situation, this would be recognized for what it is, which is sexual abuse of a child. This man is using an infant to get, to satisfy his own perverted pleasures. One of the things that it says in this article, it says, "We are only trained to provide peer support for mothers, not gay men, trans men, queer people, agender, or asexual people." Sue, who works with the Australian Breastfeeding Association for more than 10 years, told the Daily Mail Australia. Again, it's so frustrating to me. I breastfed all three of my children. This is not a sexual act. This is something that mothers do to nurture their babies. This is about erasing women. This is about sexualizing infants. This is about men claiming to be discriminated against, when in fact what they're really trying to do is to use their own offspring as sexual toys. I just can't even believe we're in this situation, and that anybody's willing to endorse this. I mean, and I really think that these are men who should not be around children.
I agree. I nursed my children too. It's a bonding time, and if you've ever held a hungry infant, they are desperate for food, and they are looking for their mother's breast to comfort them and to feed them. And that child got no comfort or nutrition, got nothing from that man but an empty nipple. I think about, what if a grandmother decided, "Oh, I miss breastfeeding. I'm going to try to breastfeed my grandchild." I think we'd all be like, "No, this isn't about you. Your breasts are empty.
Right.
This isn't going to happen." Or just a childless woman saying, "Can I borrow your baby because I really want to know what it's like to breastfeed?"
Right.
Well, you can't breastfeed because your body's not making milk.
Or perhaps, what if the man decides to suckle the baby on his penis? Is that okay? I mean, it's part of his body. It's a part of his body that doesn't produce milk in the same way that his nipple doesn't produce milk. I mean, how far are we going to humor these men? How far are we going to accept that this perversion is acceptable? I mean, to me, there's not much. I mean, it's sort of like, at what point, where do we draw the line with this behavior? Where do we say enough is enough? This is not acceptable. Well, if the baby's perfectly happy suckling on, the father's penis, what's the problem? I mean, that's where I see this going. And that's why it's so important that we stand up now. Our children need to be protected. And these are children who are very vulnerable. They're being raised in a family where they're being told their mother is their father and their father's their mother. They're probably being told they're a baby, because these are people who are denying the very essence of our sex and biology. These kids are just really in an incredibly vulnerable situation. And, if we're not willing to draw lines, then it seems like we are going to, get to a point where we're accepting really dangerous and perverted behavior.
I have a friend who, she would describe herself as pretty liberal, but she's been pretty upset about the whole drive to normalize all kinds of sexualities. And she's really criticized sort of her own liberal friends on this. She said, they want there to be no lines. They just want there to be no boundaries. There's nothing that's unacceptable. And I've been on social media chats with people who call me a prude and whatnot for having a problem with some of the sex ed. And I've asked, like, okay, is there anything that you would consider out of bounds? And they will not say that there's anything out of bounds. I've mentioned this before, I think in our Common Sense Care videos. I once asked, okay, snuff porn, where somebody is murdered in front of you, is that okay for kids to watch? And they won't answer.
Right.
They'll just leave, or they'll call me a name, but
Mhm.
they won't answer, because there's this idea that somehow boundaries are bad. And
Right.
like saying that something is wrong is wrong. Well, take that out to its logical conclusion, and you're going to have a baby sucking on a guy's penis.
Yes, exactly. And people saying that that's perfectly acceptable because they're bonding and the baby doesn't mind, Maria. Again, this is, using these infants, it's so concerning. And then we have, if an infant can suck on his dad's, his or her dad's nipple, then what about when that child gets older? Where are the boundaries? Where are the lines? As you said, at what point do we say this is not okay? And a lot of people who are buying into this critical theory are suggesting that it's not okay to ever impose boundaries, and that if children don't actively protest it, that it's okay. And this is again what brings me back to us accepting sexual assaults, serious sexual assaults of children, is that children often have sexual feelings, and it often feels somewhat pleasurable to them when they're sexually exploited. And that is what causes a lot of the conflict, is that there's a sense of them being violated and a sense of it feeling good at the same time. And what we're doing is normalizing that for children, which is incredibly dangerous. It's just completely, it's really undermining sexuality for these kids. They're never going to be able to have a normal sexual experience because they're being sexualized at such a young age. And we're also telling men that this is okay, that it's okay for you to do this to your child, and that that desperation of a child when they're so hungry and they're not getting milk. And to have that associated with a caregiver, I mean, on just so many levels. And then the mother of this child is sitting there watching all this, and is there's an interview with her, and she says she's upset because the state won't allow her to be listed as the mother or as the father on the birth certificate. They want to lie from the get-go, pretending that the mother is actually the father and the father is actually the mother. At this point, birth certificates are meaningless. Really, is there reality anymore?
Mm.
I mean, and for these children, there isn't any. There's nothing that's empirical. There's nothing that's observable. It's all based on feelings and what these adults want rather than what's the best interest of the child.
Yeah. And this is pervasive throughout the whole narrative. I'm reading a book right now in preparation for giving it a critical review called Every Day by David Levithan.
Mhm.
And the gist of the book is that the main character wakes up every day in a different person's body. So the narrator's never given a gender, of course. You don't know if it's a male or a female. Every day wakes up in a different person's body. And this has been going on since birth, ostensibly. And in one place in the book, Levithan says through the main character, well, when I was a baby, it didn't matter to me that I had different parents every day. Babies don't care who feeds them and takes care of them. And yeah,
What?
yeah, says that right in the book. I'm like, well, clearly you don't know much about raising children,
No.
because the bonding between a mother and a child, and also between the father and the child, it's a different kind of bonding. That is very important. It's very strong. If you've ever held a baby that's not yours, that baby probably isn't too comfortable with you. The baby wants his or her parents, his mother and father.
Yeah, and there's research that shows how important that bond is. And it's really sad to me that there are mothers now who, they've chopped off their breasts, so they're not actually able to nurse their children. And then they're handing their baby over to a male to nurse the child on a somebody who cannot lactate. There's something so desperately wrong with our society right now. And I just hope that at some point people realize how desperately wrong this is, how this is, we mothers typically have always been the ones to advocate and look out for children. It's sort of been our responsibility historically. It's also adults' responsibility. So whenever somebody says, why don't you mind your own business? Well, this is our business. It's our business to make sure that children, especially infants, aren't being sexually abused. And so we really need to push back on this narrative. And we're going to be called hateful, and we're going to be called bigots, and we're going to be called Nazis. But I think you've mentioned this before, that in Nazi Germany, there were lots of people who were saying, none of my business. It's not that bad. It's just the Jews. I don't have to worry about it. Well, at some point, they're going to come after you. And if we don't start, they're going to come after your kids. If we don't start putting an end to this, if we don't start insisting on boundaries, insisting that children not be used to fulfill sexual perversion of their parents, then we're going to get to a point where we're not going to be able to stop this anymore.
Right. I absolutely agree. We have got to say enough. We have all got to say enough. We all know this is wrong.
Yeah.
We all know it is wrong to put a man's empty nipple into the mouth of a hungry infant.
Yeah.
We all know this is wrong. So it's time to start saying it.
Yeah. And it's wrong that women are having their breasts amputated and they're unable to nurse their children. And they're somehow being brainwashed into believing that it's okay for a man who's pretending to be a woman to take their place. And this is heartbreaking. I actually know of a detransitioner who, one of her biggest regrets is that she's been unable to nurse her son, that she's had to use a bottle. And this is something, when you're 13, 14, 15 years old, you're not thinking, boy, I might want to nurse a baby one day. But I can tell you, as someone who never really wanted kids, when I finally had kids, they brought great joy. And nursing was a big part of that. I'm very thankful that I had that opportunity. If my husband had said, you know what, I think I'm going to nurse the baby, that would put up alarms for me. I would be deeply concerned about that. And so I think that we need to push back on this, and we need to defend the integrity of the people who are helping women to nurse, and not put them in a position where they're having to work with biological males and coach them on how to nurse. There's enough women who need these services, and it's really unfair to put the coaches, the nursing coaches, in the position where they are being told they have to work with biological males. They know this is wrong. They went into this business because they know how important nursing a baby is. And the fact that they're now being told that they have to pretend that a male is actually a woman is just putting them in an untenable situation. And I want to recognize that not all women can nurse. And I don't want to, somehow suggest that if you're a woman who hasn't nursed, that somehow, you're in fault here. But if you are a woman who can't nurse and you hand the baby over to to the opposite sex and expect them to nourish that baby, then there is something very wrong. You know that if you can't nurse a baby, you get a bottle because they need the nourishment. And again, men don't lactate. And if they are lactating, if somehow they're taking enough hormones that they're actually lactating, then that baby is getting not breast milk, but a slurry of artificial hormones, which is going to be incredibly dangerous.
I just think about, the last 10, 20 years, the mantra has been breast is best. That's what's good for babies. In the 60s and the 50s and 60s, they thought, oh, we're so technologically advanced, women don't have to breastfeed anymore. Well, they found that breast milk is the best thing for babies. And it is sad that all these young women are having their breasts cut off. And there's going to be droves of young women in the situation of the detransitioner that you talked about. I always wanted children, but I was always concerned about how I'd feel about breastfeeding. Right up until my first child was born, up to the day before he was born, I was like, oh, I'm not going to like this. I don't want to do this. I hate this. And as soon as he latched on, it was as natural as could be. It was the weirdest.
And Maria, is it sexual when a woman breastfeeds her baby?
No.
No,
even a
no,
little bit.
not even a little bit. And that's something that I don't think that these men understand, is that they're watching women breastfeed and they get aroused by it. Women
Mhm.
who breastfeed their babies are nourishing their babies. They're nurturing them, they're parenting them. This is not in any way a sexual experience for
And
them.
you know what else happens when a woman breastfeeds? Oxytocin is released
Mhm.
into her body and it helps her uterus contract.
Right.
So after she's had a baby, breastfeeding actually helps put her body back into its pre-pregnancy state.
Yeah,
There's reasons why women breastfeed,
right.
not
In
just the
addition,
nurturing
In
baby.
addition, the baby also gets, in addition to the milk, the nourishment, they get an immune system from their mother. And so these babies, again, they're being deprived of all of that,
Yeah,
as well as being used as it can only be described as a sex toy for these men.
yeah,
And it's heartbreaking to see the mother watching this and not having that natural response of protectiveness, which is what most women would have if they saw their baby being in this, put in this situation. So these
yeah.
women have been really, I believe they've been brainwashed into accepting this. And I don't know what we do to turn this around, but we need to keep speaking out and objecting. And we don't call it chest feeding journey. We call
No.
it breastfeeding because that's what it is. And we don't accept that men can be chest feeders, because men who are trying to chest feed are really perverting the natural process of
Yeah.
feeding an infant.
Yep, I absolutely agree with you. It's got to stop.
Yeah. So these pictures are disturbing. The video that's out there is even more disturbing. I just want to, not to be totally negative, but if this is something that people are willing to have filmed and put out there for the world to see, imagine what's going on that they're not sharing. And that's what I think we really need to be critical about. Again, when we live in a society where anything goes, where moral relativity has taken hold and nobody's willing to say that something is not okay, we are getting to the point where we're going to have, little tiny infants being used as sex objects. Um, and that's not okay. And I'm willing to say it's not okay. I'm willing to say that that's bad for kids. We need to have more people who are willing to stand up and really insist on these important boundaries that are there for the health and well-being of both the child as well as the parents.
Mhm. Yep, I agree. Please come to Partners for Ethical Care, partnersforethicalcare.com. Email us at support@partnersforethicalcare. We need more voices. We want to join hands with you and demand that we start protecting our kids.
Mhm. And the language has to stop. We need to stop ever using the term chest feeder. We need to start insisting that these are mothers who are nurturing and nourishing their infants. This is such an important part of motherhood. For it to be taken over like this by autogynophiles is just incredibly disheartening. So again, come to Partners for Ethical Care. We want to hear from you. We've got lots of information, and thanks for watching.